the romance from Bizet's The Pearl-Fishers, and my guest, Mr. Richard Tucker, I would like you to identify the voice and say a few things about it.
Thank you, George. That was recorded in my early years in 1947-48 era, after my debut at the Metropolitan Opera, conducted by the wonderful maestro Emil Cooper. And listening to the record, George, makes me feel rather nostalgic, as you can understand, because a lot of water has gone under the bridge, so to speak. We use that as a term. And it's a combination, as we spoke, longevity, which is a blessing, I say, in every phase, in every aspect of life, whether it be professional or not. And I think it's a combination of things that makes one career stand out above others. I think it's a happy home, conditioning, taking care of yourself, guidance by your teachers to study the right roles, and, of course, a little mazel, luck, as we call it. Now, what does that luck mean? Being prepared and to have success in that role, which leads to other offers in other roles.
Well, I would also add good judgment, because I think that, well, the beautiful example we heard presented you at a younger period of your life when the voice was lighter and more lyric. It was, I should really say that it was an absolutely beautiful rendition. I've cherished it over the years, and
you can certainly hear the difference between that and today. The old and new.
It's a more dramatic voice, and you would be the best judge of it. But I would like to go back to what I said before: a judgment which enabled you to sing the right roles at the right time, and to know when you were ready for the heavier roles.
The spinto roles.
That's right, the spinto roles, and later the dramatic roles. Yes. And one specific question I'd like to ask you: in 1949, you recorded the role of Radames for Tuscany for radio broadcast, which is available on records. Now, this is at the very least a spinto, but many consider it a real dramatic,
of course,
voice. Now, you had the role in the voice for many, many years thereafter. You knew you could sing it. You did it extremely well on the record, and yet, to the best of my knowledge, for many years thereafter...
20 years.
For 20 years, you did not really sing it.
On stage.
On stage.
That's true, George, and for one specific reason. Because singing for records is entirely different than singing it with dramatic impact on stage, when you've got to fill a house of 3,000 or 3,800 people. And people have asked me why you didn't sing Canio for 25 years. Now, can you imagine a tenor having a career without singing Vesti la Juba? I'm the first one in history. And I've been blessed, George, and as to reiterate my statement from before, one of the outstanding aspects of a longevity of my career has been to say no to roles which were offered to me in my younger years, which had the spinto plus the dramatic impact. And that I can only say thanks to two people, one who is not present, of course, in this world of the living, was Paul Althouse, and my present coach, Joseph Garnett. They both used to tell me, let the other tenors yell their lungs out if they wish, but you will be around as my friend and respected and revered maestro Emil Cooper for one, and Maestro Fritz Stiedry, who persuaded me to sing Così fan tutte against my will. But later I found him to be so truthful. He was like a father to me, you see. So it's a combination of things.
Yes.
Because in the younger years, as you just pointed out after listening to this lyrical record of mine, in the year my young career, when I was just at the Metropolitan, perhaps 2 or 3 years, and I recall when, after my successful debut of La Gioconda, which is a dramatic role, and nobody offered me any kind of hope to take on this role for a debut at the Metropolitan. Only one person, my wife, and the other person was my teacher, Paul Althouse. But nobody in the musical world. They said to me, plain language, musically speaking, if you want to commit suicide vocally at the Metropolitan, go ahead and do it. But I had the determination, plus the know-how and the guidance from Paul Althouse and Emil Cooper, not to give too much dramatically at this young point of my career. So thank God it was a great success, as the papers and the critics reviewed it.
Absolutely.
But after that, to refer back to your former statement, the Met wanted me to do Aida and Pagliacci at Forza del Destino. And I recall auditioning for Bruno Walter in Los Angeles, because following my debut in 45, I assumed the vocal program, the Westinghouse program from John Charles Thomas for the summer vacation. And I recall going out to Los Angeles, and Frank St. Ledger and Edward Johnson, rest their souls, said to me, I want you to audition because Maestro Bruno Walter will be out there and we want you to sing Forza del Destino. After singing the aria for me, he cupped my face in his two hands and he said in German, Mein Kind, you will never last the opera. And I looked at him and I didn't understand what he meant. But I understood later as the conversation progressed. He says, you sing too well. You give too much.
You put too much into the aria.
And you're too young. In other words, it's like a horse race, so to speak. You know, I use it as a term that you cannot finish.
You have to pace yourself.
Have to pace yourself.
Yes.
So getting back to the art of studying vocally, I think it's a combination of these three things. Learning to say no, which singers today do not know and don't hear that word. They're deaf to that word because they're afraid opportunity will never come again.
Yes. I've heard some of your colleagues refer to these roles as the, quote, money roles, which, of course,
I've heard that.
Right,
it's nonsensical. No, it's
so.
nonsensical. I don't even get into that type of conversation, George, because you know me well enough. I've always been asked, and I really feel very proud to be the possessor of such a reputation by my colleagues, young colleagues at the Metropolitan. They call me the big brother because they know my door is always open. They can ask anything of me how. Pertaining to vocal projection. And also, I find that when I hear these things or listen to some of my colleagues sing some of the roles which I know that you're not fit, you see, we're living in a different era today. It's a fast era, you see, with the fast, is, as you explained before, the fast buck, you know, so to speak.
Yes. It's interesting that you mentioned before the name of the late Fritz Stidry, because I had already instructed our engineer to set up our next record, which happens to be the tenor aria from Così fan tutte.
Thank you, George.
My love is a flower, oh fragrant before me, who soothe and restore me with
The aria, frequently known, best known as Un'aura amorosa, from Mozart's Così fan tutte, which my guest Richard Tucker sang when the opera was revived in an English language version and conducted by Fritz Stidry at least 20 years ago, maybe more. And Mr. Tucker gratefully remembers Mr. Stidry's advice to try a little Mozart.
Oh, that is, as I've always said, George, that is the cereal of our voice. And I tell that to all young singers. A little Mozart thrown in will always be, to quote Maestro Stidry, the jelly in your throat. Then 2 days later, I sang Forza or Carmen, and then reverted back to Così fan tutte 2 days after that.
And I saw you in Così fan tutte when it was last staged, just, I don't know, maybe 7-8 years ago.
Yeah.
You had an awful lot of fun in that role.
It was a joy to do that role. I can't thank Maestro Stidry, rest his soul, enough. Well, I've been given advice by many of the great maestros, and with thanks and praise to them, and I always mention their names. Because, you know, as we believe in our religion, when you mention the name of a departed one, it is a blessing, because they are remembered. And when I write my book, when I retire, so to speak, a lot of people are waiting for me to write of my association in musical circles with the great maestros and great casts. You can imagine, George. I promise you that I will give you the first published book.
Well, thank you.
First copy.
Look forward to, but don't retire as yet.
No, not
We have
yet.
A lot of things to do yet.
Yes.
We were talking about, of course, vocal longevity, and also your reminiscence, and you are focusing on the idea of what it takes to say no at the right time and when to know when you are ready. But I think that my listeners would be interested to know, Just how does a lyric voice turn spinto and dramatic? Is it a biological function? I mean, is this something that one can expect, say, at the age of 40, or does it come different to different people?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, George, because one of my chapters I can visualize, will be titled, There Are No Dramatic Tenors Born. Now, what does that mean? To put it in three categories, you cannot become old before your time. You cannot be a dramatic tenor at the ripe old age of 21 years old. It is impossible. If you are a freak, so to speak. Why do I say that? A boy rather, may sing huskily or with a lot of huff, so to speak, but that is not singing. So you rarely hear a, shall we say, bombastic voice at 21 or 23 years old. So we're all born babes out of our mother's wombs. And when a person studies at that age of 21 or 23, as he goes along in years, he should assume more spinto roles, example, from Rigoletto or La Bohème Traviata into a role like, let us say, Young Verdi. You see, Simon Boccanegra. Mass ball already is a little more advanced, I would say, at the age of 30 to 35 in that era. And then, of course, when you reach the age of 40, by that, you must know what you're doing. If you're doing it right or wrong, you're doing it. But when I hear young singers auditioning for me, and hearing young singers on stage singing roles of Mass Ball, André Chenier, and I know they're all of 28 to 32 in that era, that age limit, I know that they're only injuring their voice. It's only a question of how many years they're going to go on before they're not engaged again, you see. So to get back to my former statement of not singing Aida for 20 years on stage, or Pagliacci 25 years on stage, the success story is I'm the living proof, so to speak.
You see, meantime, how many sad stories of singing?
And sad stories, as you know, George. Being in the enviable position as I am today of being, I think, the oldest singer at the Metropolitan. When I say oldest, I'm speaking, I'm there 29 years now, and I'm just ahead of Bob Merrill by a few months, 6 months or 7 months. But we both are at the pinnacle of our careers, you see, and it's only because we have been given the blessing of guidance between our vocal teachers and our coaches. And that is the story.
My guest is Richard Tucker, and we pause here for a moment. We'll be right back. We have been talking about Richard Tucker's fabulous career, and I received an answer to my question, an answer which, of course, we must understand that this is an individual answer, but applied to Mr. Tucker's career and his special approach to voice conversation may not apply to every singer, because I think that we must not ignore the human element. I have my own private theory about it, but it seems to me that if a person has a stable life, free of hang-ups, free of special anxieties, we all have some, but I mean, not excessive anxieties, free of excessive insecurities, that can also help. I know, and we all know who read about him, that Mr. Tucker has had a very happy family life. He and his wife brought up 3 sons who are now out on their own and successful. All these things, Richard, I imagine, contribute to.
I definitely agree, George. It's a combination, as I said before, of happy married home life, studying all the time, guidance all the time, saying no to dramatic roles, waiting it out until the proper time comes. Because, people have always asked me, as you once mentioned, are you ever going to sing Otello? This is always the inevitable question. But, I can sing Otello if I want to. Why not? But I feel myself that the voice would not fill the requirements that this role demands. And that is the reason why I don't sing Otello.
Well, again, it shows judgment, because you are the best judge of your own...
That's correct.
...of your own capabilities. You have, well, as long as I was about to say you have sung Samson, which is certainly a very, very dramatic role. You have done
It's emotional.
Like Koloff,
Yes.
that's right. And this all, of course, indicates a certain pattern set by Caruso, who also stopped short of singing Othello. He may or may not have done it later on, but then again, there was a time in his life when he felt he was ready for Samson. There was a time in his life when he was ready for La Juive, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. I also noted, I think in several interviews you have indicated that of the various roles that you have had, and you've had I think, very large repertoire.
32 operas.
32 roles, yes.
Yep.
And the role of De Grieux in Manuel Lescaut somehow stands out as a special favorite. Could you tell me
You're
and
so
my
right.
audience why?
I think because as an overall opera, George, this opera required such passionate singing, histrionically, emotional singing, acting, that I became De Grieux in my younger years when I first studied this role. I used to come home red-eyed, and Sarah thought I was crying. And I would say to her, just leave me be for an hour or so till I compose myself. And I honestly felt, as we know the story of the Dybbuk, the role of De Grieux became part of me. And this is the reason why, of course, the combination with the singing, I must bring it out first, that you must have the vocal prowess to sing such a role, became my favorite role.
You completely identified with the character.
That's correct.
Let's hear a bit of that. You, Richard, that I got so carried away when the music came to the point where the captain should have said Popolare le Americhe Giovinotto.
We were both
del
there.
Teatro. I felt like saying those words because it was omitted. But
Well, now I
can't
think the record
that.
speaks for itself, George, what I mean. You know, people have always asked me, or told me rather after a performance, why do you give so much, Richard? And I always respond, I said, when you know what you're singing about, how can you stand there and just sing without any kind of characterization of what you're singing about? And I guess in my short career, George, I mean, if I can't produce what I think is best, I'm going to give up.
Well, it's all in there.
Thank you, George.
What we just heard. You've been thoughtful enough to give credit to various maestri, your teachers, your coach, and therein, in this past career, the image of Caruso somehow cast a shadow over it in a sense of some form of a distant influence. I am sure it must have been a kind of an example to follow. Of course, to some extent, I think, there isn't a tenor who would not wish to at least take some lesson from that great life and a great career. But in what way did it affect you or influence you?
Well, I've always been a great admirer of Enrico Caruso, as I'm sure everyone was. But listening to him on records, of course, sitting on the sidewalk on the Lower East Side, because we couldn't afford those records, in those days. I will say, though, which I know a lot of people will refute my statement, and I've never issued it before, that when I went to study with Paul Oldhouse, as an example, knowing tenors, as he was a tenor, he said to me, Richard, I want you to forget that there was a tenor called Caruso. And naturally, being a young student, I stood there, mouth aghast, goggle-eyed. But I knew why he said it. Because he did not want me to imitate any singer. And that is the reason, through the years, I've always said, because my life is an open book, as you know, George. My statements are read by many people. I sing like Richard Tucker. I do not imitate anybody. And yet I was a lover, a great fan of both Enrico Caruso and Beniamino Gigli, in whose home we go to visit Mrs. Gigli and her daughter Rena, and I sit on the floor, I don't mind telling you, listening to these recordings. Because when these two men died, we use a term, they threw the mold away.
Yes.
These were artists, regardless, great artists, what you thought of them musically. As we know, we hear stories, from different maestros about Beniamino Gigli. He's the maestro's bad boy. Why? Because he took a lot of time, see. But I was a great fan, great admirer, and I still listen. I can tell you stories, George, but I know you haven't got the time. I was just sent 2 days ago, when I arrived home from my little vacation we had in Florida, a package containing the pictures of the funeral cortege of Enrico Caruso by a fan who I never received any letters from Kansas City, Missouri, Mr. Cunningham. And he said, Mr. Tucker, you are the sole survivor of that era, of the Verdi era, and your voice brings to me so many memories of the great Caruso. I want you to have these pictures. In fact, I only mentioned it yesterday. I was at the Metropolitan Opera to Francis Robinson, and he said, Richard, I have them in my book. I said, well, I was so carried away, I thought maybe you would like them.
Well, and fittingly, a great role which was one of the highlights of Caruso's career was the role of Eleazar in Halévy's La Juive. And it is also, as you said before, very properly, that your life has been an open book. Your long-held desire to sing this role, we've been reading about it for quite some time. It did not materialize at the Metropolitan. You did sing it recently in New Orleans, and recently the Opera News had a very interesting coverage of that performance. And we are fortunate enough to have a portion of your current recording, which we got, of highlights from La Juive. And before I play the Passover scene from it, I would like to ask you what in particular was that attracted you to the role of Eleazar?
Well, I think primarily, George, I think the role of Eleazar has been linked with me because, first, of my Orthodox background, number one, coming from pious parents, and number two, I think that I am the blessed being the sole survivor today at the Opera House, who, or in the operatic world, I should say, who has the feeling as a pious Jew to convey this role across the footlights. And I felt that I was not ready until recently because, as you know, it was the first time, the first transition in my musical life from playing the lover to a father.
That's right.
And I wanted to be sure that I was mature enough to portray the role of a father. Though not very, very aged, I estimated him between the age of 55 to 60 in that year period. But yet, as you see, and as you know the role, I've seen pictures of Eleazar with Caruso and other tenors who have performed it. It's a pious Jew, white beard, and yet grayish beard, not entirely white. And yet, I didn't want to make a fool of myself until I felt I was ready. And this past year, I've had great success with it, and I look forward, and I hope and pray. In fact, I'm doing 3 performances. I've just been engaged to sing it in Spain, in Barcelona.
Oh, that's interesting.
But I have not lost hope yet and faith to perform it here in New York City.
Well, may it happen soon.
I hope and pray.
Here is the Passover scene. Richard Tucker, you really like this opera. It's more to you than just a, as they call a vocal vehicle. I imagine there is
much
a
more
great deal in the story which appeals to
nostalgic, of course, the story which, as you know, and many, many music lovers know the story of La Juive, the father who brings up this daughter, which was left behind by the Cardinal Broglie and has been reared in the Jewish faith and is condemned to death, not knowing that he's sending his own daughter to the, I was going to say gallows. It's not, it's the burning gourd.
It's much worse, actually.
Yes, much worse. But it's a very, very emotional, and it's a satisfaction for me to sing such a portrayal at this stage of my career, George.
Well, it's a very powerful story, and after having revived all the Bellinis and Donizettis, perhaps some impresario will bring this
I look forward to
work also. And before closing, I would like to ask Richard Tucker what his current plans are, what new departures, new challenges are in the offing.
Well, I'm just studying right now. In fact, I just started this week looking into the role of Handel's Samson, the oratorio, which I'm going to perform this spring at Carnegie Hall for the Handel Society. And it's a pleasure to go back to singing this type of music because I've been a lover of oratorio. In fact, I don't mind reminiscing about the first time Maestro Metropolis, rest his soul, fell in love with me. It was while I was singing my first performance of Elijah, and when he left the last year with the New York Philharmonic at Carnegie Hall. So for me, it's a joy because, first of all, it gives me the opportunity to show my flexibility in the cadenzas, you know, and the trills, and the arias, Total Eclipse, and Why Does Israel Sleep, you know. So it's for me a great joy, and I hope and pray that many people will come to hear this wonderful musical production of Handel's Samson.
Well, all I can tell you, Richard, is that it's a delight for me to watch you getting real excited and thrilled by an opportunity like that after such a glorious career of so many years, lasting from the example of your first lyrical period, which you just heard, all the way up to your latest recordings. It's been a great pleasure for me to have you here with me, and I hope you'll visit me again.
George, just call me. Thank you.
Thank you.